wonderful to have you here. I am very excited that we're actually having a conversation about goddesses as crones so that
Mm-hmm.
we can really begin to lay a base for any future conversations that go forward. I've had a lot of fun with the calls I've had so far, but I've always felt that there's like this little extra piece that's needed, and that's why I'm so excited you'll be here because to me, you are my resident goddess expert. And so
Oh.
I'm looking forward to having this conversation. But before we get started, I really want to introduce you to everyone and give a little bit of your bio to people so that they have an understanding of where you are coming from and why I invited you. Jenn is a mythologist and writer. She is a trained contemporary shaman who brings a love of the ancient goddess and especially Celtic and Germanic Norse mythology to her work. Her studies formally began in 2011. I think a lot before then, but we'll go with this. And Jenn has experienced a renewed love for working with the Norse runes as a tool for spiritual awakening. She is the owner of the website fairymothermedicinewoman.com and is currently working on a new virtual space to fully express her passion for the art of Sithir,
Close enough.
okay, or Norse shamanism. Jenn is also the creator of Rune Journeys, hi sweetie, an online and immersive self-study of the runes. Jenn believes a joyful life's journey comes from fully engaging the primal evil goddess archetype within ourselves through knowing, accepting, and loving the wise woman within, who is a constant guide. Jenn has many places that you can find her, and so at the end, as always, we will list all of those places so that you can find her. So Jenn, welcome, and welcome to Smoky 2. And,
Thanks.
let's begin. Talk to me a little bit about the crone as a goddess.
Well, when I first went to college and I was taking classes and kind of exploring on my own, finally you're away from home, you have your time to sort of figure things out. The first goddess I came across in my own personal journey was Ceridwen, who is a Welsh goddess of the cauldron. And as it turns out, she is associated with the crone energy, the older version of the goddess, the crone face of the triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And she became very beloved for me and was sort of tied into my fandom of the Arthurian legends and everything. She was sort of tied up in all of that. And so that was the first dip in. And then as I kept learning and researching and finding out more and more, you sort of start unraveling this thread and find out there's goddesses everywhere in every culture, all around the planet, tens of thousands of years of history,
Wow.
and that the oldest statues that have been found of like the Venus of Willendorf, for example,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
um, were definitely, well, we don't really know exactly what those were, what the real point of them, the figurines was. But there's such a strong sense of the ancient with those, the gateways to the other world and all of that, and they do not match, current standards for beauty.
No. If I'd known you were going to talk about this, I would have brought mine because she really looks like a crone woman. She
Mhm.
really embodies what transforms for the female body when she reaches that crone stage. So that's very true. She is not our current beauty standard at all.
And she kind of popped into my more conscious awareness recently through the runes because I was writing about the rune Berkana, which is, it looks like a letter B, um, and it means birch goddess.
Oh, really?
Or birch tree. It's affiliated with the lore of the birch tree, and it looks like that, right?
Right. Okay.
So like that.
Uh-huh.
And if you take one of those Venus figures and you look at her in profile, what do you think? Can you see the breast and then the pregnant
Yes.
stomach?
Yes.
So I really feel this strong sense of, an ancient presence, deep knowing the energy behind all the others, this sort of hold. We talk about that, the hold behind the hold, but it just feels like a very powerful energy, not frail, not anything like that. So
No, definitely not frail. And do you find that are there similar characteristics throughout the world with this goddess?
yeah, I think so. For example, in the British Isles, there's a hag figure, kind of collectively known as Cailleach, Cailleach, and she's taken different forms, different names, different myths and legends depending on the region.
Mm-hmm.
But she's a very ancient energy of the land. She is the land and was once incredibly venerated. And she's could be partially an ancestral spirit, someone who a female energy, divine energy that followed families, that stayed with the land,
Okay.
But then in the Slavic countries, we have Baba Yaga,
Oh, yes.
who rides in her divine mortar and pestle.
Yep.
And there's no hiding from her. There's no saying, oh, well, I'm going to work with you, but I'm going to keep this little part of me. I don't want to, let's keep that aside.
Yes.
No, everything becomes spared. And often the stories got changed over
Okay.
time. She became the child eater and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, symbolically, doesn't the old eat the young anyway? I mean, we all age. We don't escape that. So as a theme, it sort of makes sense. Was never meant to be taken as a evil thing whatsoever. It
Right.
kind of got altered by who was telling the stories.
Well, yeah, and I think sometimes too they altered the story to take the power away.
Yeah, absolutely.
To make it frightening and something that people did not want to partake in.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, the conquering tribe or the religion or whoever was coming in, if they take away the country or the people's soul,
Mm-hmm.
then they can own them. And I
Right.
think oftentimes Baba Yaga, I mean, to me, she shows up through Halloween. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she has never really gone away. She just got morphed into different pieces. And I think that's the fascinating piece about the goddesses, the crone goddesses, is do you find that they didn't disappear, that they got morphed or tweaked a little bit, but they show up in a different avenue than they originally may have been used for?
Yeah, and I think one thing that sort of gets mislaid is the fact that they're also creator beings. They're not just death bringers, that they were midwives, that they were the ones who helped birth the new and would be there during the crossing over times too. So they were midwives to the other world in both directions, and in the Inuit mythology, there's an amazing goddess, Sedna,
Mm-hmm.
who originally was a young woman. She was sent off to get married, and the husband by her father, and the husband to be turned out to be not so great. And the great storm whipped up, and the father wanted to save himself, so he throws her overboard, and she grips the side of the boat, and he cuts her fingers so that she sinks. And the story goes that as that happened, the animals of the sea were born from her carved fingers. They became the whales and the dolphins and the seals and the fish and all those things. And she went to dwell in the underworld, watery realm. And the Inuit shamans would, and I don't know if they use the term shaman, but the medicine people of their community in times of trouble would journey to Sedna and comb her hair and massage her hurt fingers in order to open the gateways so that she'd restore food, restore the abundance to the community. And she's now seen as an old woman, with gray, matted, knotted hair, and, gnarled, fingers and all that. But I always loved the idea of tending to this figure.
Yes.
Going to her and offering solace and comfort, and in exchange for return of abundance, because she's restoring life.
Yeah.
She's giving life back in exchange for relationship and attention, and the bond, the loyalty between the tribe and her. So, and I think that's kind of a common thing between them all, that there's a connection between the land and the land as a life giver, and the stories that are told. I don't think they're ever separated.
Okay. And that in many ways that makes sense, because we call her Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And like what you just said, there is this life that's given through the land. It feeds the people, continues to help them to stay alive. So that would make sense, and it is through the wisdom, of the older woman, having progressed, that they know how to bring the life in. Again, the midwife, and then transitioning others into the other life, into the other world, once they have lived their life here on the planet. I really like the term midwife. I really like that term being used in the aspects of a crone, as a quality of a crone. In the goddesses, in the other ones, you sent me a couple of ones. You sent me an Egyptian one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And is that, how is her presence in the Egyptians? Is she used as a midwife? Do you see that with her? Does she have a little bit different quality?
Maybe a little bit different quality. That would be Wadjet, Wadjet, for those who are listening later. But she was a snake goddess, and very ancient, very old, predating a lot of the more common, more familiar to people. Really, I shouldn't say more common, but names like Isis and Bast, the cats and the play and all of that. So she goes back way farther, and has a fierce energy. And to me, she feels similar to Baba Yaga and the Hag, that you have to approach her with a certain stance. I come seeking this. This is why, and you need to be sort of prepared for when it comes to snake medicine and the cobra medicine. Your whole being is going to be, transformed. She may help you shed your skin, which to a certain extent might be seen again as the midwifery type of thing, because she's helping you birth a new self. How the ancient Egyptians termed that, honestly, I'm not sure. I'd have to kind of go back through the stories, but I do know she was very beloved, and even though she sort of became absorbed away into the rest of the pantheon that came, her symbol of the cobra, the snake, is seen in a lot of the headdresses and art and all of that. So her protective energy, her presence, all of that really stayed as a symbol in the Egyptian culture, never really went away. And I think that positive snake energy is very important.
Yes, I know, because everybody thinks, I mean, even I did growing up, I was like, oh. But it's a level of deep transformation using snake energy.
Yeah.
And to have her be known as that's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very shows how revered she was if they continue to use it even though she may not have been set aside.
Mm-hmm.
That's very fascinating that's how that's done. What are some of the other things that you have found as you've wandered through? I just think it's fascinating, the crone, although I don't know, the crone is present in across the world.
Yeah, yeah, and I think one of the fun ones, or more, interesting stories is in Norse mythology. They personified old age in general into a goddess figure, Ellie, and I may not exactly be pronouncing that right, but it's Ellie, I think. But Thor was on an adventure with Loki and one of their servants, and they encountered some giants and ended up spending the night in the giants' hall. And while they were there, they were put through various tests.
Okay.
And Thor especially was put through tests of strength because his big claim to fame was his manliness and complete, he epitomized the manly warrior strength, the god of thunder with his hammer that crushed everything. So, amongst the other things, the third test he was put to was to wrestle the giant's nursemaid. And she came into the hall, kind of a, hunched over old woman. And Thor figured this was going to be easy, no big deal. He'd arm wrestle her. Wasn't this funny? And the giants were teasing him and saying, "Oh, the god of thunder, I bet you can't even beat our old woman in an arm wrestling match." So of course he took the challenge and found that she was a lot stronger than he imagined. And it was a pretty fair test of strength. And at the point where she brought him down to one knee, the giant called off the match and said, "Okay, that's good enough." And next morning, all of the real story behind the different tests were revealed. And the old nursemaid was actually Ellie, the goddess of old age personified. So Thor was strong enough to match her to a certain extent, but even he could, was still brought down to one knee. And the giant was incredibly impressed and said, "If we'd known how well you would do, we never would have let you in." But that was the thing. The Norse gods and goddesses were not immortal, and they did age. And in order to preserve their appearance, their beauty and everything, they consumed apples of immortality that belonged to another goddess. So, they had to eat the apples.
It's interesting.
So that was really, to me, a very fascinating thing about the worldview of these ancient people, that even their mythological figures were not immune to aging. To them, this was part of life. And
wow.
But she was shown as this incredible figure of strength because no one escapes.
Right.
Unless you're killed in battle or whatnot.
Right,
It's
exactly.
their way. But aging affects everyone, even the gods. So
that's very fascinating that they did that. We'll probably have to bring you back on the discussion on that, because it's like, all right, so the gods got old, but they ate the apples, so therefore they were still there with every generation that came forward, right?
Right. But then, in Norse mythology, they all are destroyed during Ragnarok.
Exactly.
And that's a mysterious thing in and of itself that I've chased and followed to find out, well, but we still tell their stories. They're still alive. We don't really say that they're dead. And yet this was a world cycle that ended and the world was immediately rebirthed. So again, coming back to the crone figure, she really represents to a certain point rebirth and transformation. It's a new stage, it's a new strength, it's a new opportunity, not so much a withering away and a weakening. You
Right. Right.
know?
And I'm going to ask a question here. So, the crone is the birth and the rebirthing. But within the goddesses and the archetypes, we know we have the maiden and the mother, or the maiden and the matron and the crones.
Mhm.
So, within those archetypes, though, there isn't it an actual passage that they represent that is the process to be taken as a human?
Yeah. Are you saying like so we're sort of it represents a complete pattern for the human experience.
Yes,
So
and each one is a cycle.
mm,
And that each person knows, I mean, through their teaching and as they use them, because we don't use them now like we did.
right.
So were they presented as here's what it's like for you at 16, here's what it's like for you as a mother, and here's what it's like for you, and you knew as a woman, or also because the crones were also for men and women, were they not? Did you run into any men crones, male crones?
Um that's an interesting
Because I'm like, I've not
example.
heard of one, and it's
Um
like men grow
but
old.
I do know, for example, with Caradwyn, she possessed the cauldron of knowledge and wisdom. And this cauldron, she brewed up a potion for her son, Morfran, who was ugly and stupid and, kind of, and so she wanted to at least, because his physical appearance was so bad. This is the myth. I'm not.
Yeah, I know. We don't have any pictures
She
of them from
wanted to
back
help
then.
give him at least knowledge, so she brewed up this potion, and she had to go out. So she had her uh, helper Gwydion stir it, and he was told, "Do not sample the potion. It's not for you." Well, he spilled some on his hand, and he licked his finger, and realized,
Yeah.
So he consumed like three drops, and Caradwyn came back, realized what had happened, and he escaped. He fled from her, and he kept changing forms, and she kept changing forms, and she finally caught him. He was an ear of corn, she was a chicken, and she ate him, and then 9 months later, after a 9-month gestation, gives birth to him as a full-grown man, and he became Taliesin, the Merlin, you
Oh.
know, who we know of from Arthurian legend, and he was always shown as the kind of essential, druid figure with the gray long beard and the robes and the staff, and we also have Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, and he's also drawn as the wizened old man who was a magician, super knowledgeable, knew all the almost like a super spy who could also do magic. And Odin is also, he was All Father, and he's often drawn, he has one eye because he gave up an eye for wisdom and the long beard. So there is that sort of, I think people, I think the grandfather in the sky god has had an easier time as history progressed.
Yes, I think so too. Well, and I also think so too that, I mean, men do go through a physical change, not as distinct
Right. And
as the woman does, and so therefore it's going to be more obvious.
yeah. And we have that sort of lingering double standard, although it seems like men are also now being affected by the stay young, look young in their own magazines and whatnot.
Yeah, they are.
But I do think that when you were asking about, rites of passage and the way women at different stages in life would serve as a model for women as they were, growing up. I think in the past and in some areas, around the world, it's still a part of the village celebrating. It's more of a big deal as a girl, you know, grows up and goes through different processes. And I know for me, my personal life, I was very lucky to have three grandmothers growing up, two grandmothers and a great grandmother.
Oh, wow.
Also different, also very different. And my great grandmother was from Italy, and her cooking, her magic, her alchemy was all in the kitchen. She would make the most amazing food, and she would sit. She wouldn't eat herself. She would sit and kind of, look and make sure everyone else was eating, and she'd eat her own meal in the kitchen by herself.
Wow.
Because she was more concerned with the family eating. And I remember playing in her house, and she was a wonderful person. And then my other Italian grandmother, Jane, is still with us, thank God.
Yay! Fantastic.
And she's my soulmate. To a certain extent, I can't imagine surviving teenagerhood without being able to go to her house, and talk to her. And even when we didn't agree on certain things, like when I got caught watching Madonna there was still something, there was and still is something special there. And I've always felt a certain, I don't know, I've always had friends that were older than me, and I've always felt more comfortable around the grandmother type of person, and I think that all of us have all of the different facets of the goddess in us at any time.
Yes.
It's just you might embody one at one stage of your life more than another. Like I'm a new mother now. Well, my daughter's 5 now, but I feel for me most resonant with that, and I can say it with more confidence now because little kids are recognizing it. I'm getting hugged out of nowhere, and a little girl was like trying to escape off her porch to get to me across the street one day. Literally, she was her mother was taking a nap, and her grandmother was watching her, and she saw me outside and started, she was hysterically crying and reaching and trying to escape off the porch. And I went over, and she leapt in my lap and wrapped her arms around my neck.
Wow. And do you know her?
No, I had never met.
I think somewhere along the line you know her.
This is little baby. I knew the neighbor. The neighbor knew me, and it was her daughter that was visiting from Seattle, and so I think that we do recognize the different archetypes at different times, and you might feel drawn to the one that you need, or the one that has the messages for you. And anyone who's on a healing path, whatever type of work that they're doing, they have to understand life, death, rebirth, that whole cycle: birth, life, death, and rebirth. You have to get all of it.
Yeah.
You can't pick one or the other, or you can't be effective.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you. Even though it's never, when you're working with people, it may not be a physical death, but every person goes through birth, death, and rebirth all the time. I mean, it's blatantly obvious in our seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just representation of what we actually go through until finally we do have the final physical death and the spiritual rebirth. So, with that in mind, as a woman, because it's pretty much available to women, readily available to women, using these aspects of the goddess, and then finding themselves at 35, 25, in a situation where they find themselves using their crone, what would be a words of wisdom to someone at 25, 30, because they're not expecting this in a situation as such? What would be words of wisdom to them as to how to use that aspect? You know, how to call in this goddess.
Yeah. I think it's part of knowing yourself and knowing what you know, and sort of owning the wisdom that you've got at the time. And for some, it may be you're going to have a mirror in your physical life to match what you need. So you might have your literal actual grandmother who's a positive influence for you. You might have a friend, a teacher, mentor. There's going to be someone somehow, whether it's even a dream teacher, for those who are talent gifted in that way. There's going to be something like that, and I think there's some type of connection to your own wisdom that you've carried, and it might be hard to own that. It might be hard to say, I am this, I know this. So you can call upon your positive ancestors if you don't know them, And I remember our mutual teacher, Robin, early on, in one of her videos, had women reciting the names of their female line. I am so-and-so, daughter of so-and-so, daughter of so-and-so, and as far back as you can remember. And even if you don't know all the way back, you can still invoke it, because, it's in our very cells, right. The knowledge. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
I don't know
it does. There's a yes. Because I think one of the things that for some people they don't have the crone aspects. They don't have grandmothers. Depending on, when I was growing up, everyone had their children in their early 20s. And so grandmothers and great-grandmothers were all still around because we were having our children younger. But a lot of people are having their children later in life, and they don't necessarily have anyone around to draw to, to pull to. So the suggestion you had of there is someone, whether it is your family, there is a mentor somewhere out there that can help support whatever, because really they're supporting you and tapping into it.
Yeah.
A good crone doesn't sit there and wave her finger at you and tell you how to do it.
No. And at 25, you're transitioning out of the maiden and into the crone. The mother. Yeah. But at the same time, it's not linear. It's never that neat and clean. And there are so many who are born wise children, who seem so serious, and I seem to know more than they should, and then there are old women who have this clear as a bell sort of innocence about them that's incredibly powerful.
Yes.
It's unburdened. It's sort of like this. It's hard to put it into words. I can only sort of tell you how I see it. But when I look at pictures from like on Pinterest or something, and if you look up old women and beauty of aged women, you see it in the eyes, these crystal clear, gaze, and you can hear them sort of cackling at you, and
It's very
and
true.
and even Baba Yaga, she has sort of this fierce reputation, and you can sort of imagine her wrapping you with her stick handle or whatever. But she really was a guide, and she was a helper, and I know in a lot of people have heard of her, the story of her and Vasilisa, the young girl who came trying to improve her situation at home, and Baba Yaga served as a helper, gave her the doll, gave her what she needed to pass her own tests.
Yes.
So I think that's important. You can't skip stages, you can't be what you're not, but you can find in the goddess archetypes, you can always find yourself. You can, and I think that's what I love so much about the mythology, is that you can be having a rager of a day, and there's Morrigan, who is
Yeah. She kicks ass.
yeah, and she's also Skadi. I had a dream one night of Skadi, the winter goddess from Norse mythology, and she was also a giantess, and she had me by my arm, this like grip, and she was telling me her name over and over again and saying, "You need to look at the land, the mountains." Like she was like intense, this close to my face, hair flying, and so that's kind of how I feel the wise woman, crone woman energy is this sort of ferocious. There's nowhere to hide, and you don't want to. You want her to help get rid of what's immature. Well, not get rid of, but you know what I mean.
There's a time when you have to give up the spoiled teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And the crone is the aspect of you that really finds that last remaining 2-year-old that throws the tantrums.
Yeah.
That in many ways has stopped your progression or stopped things coming into your life because this 2-year-old keeps showing up. And the crone is the helper, but sometimes the helper has to be fierce to get it to come up. But
Absolutely.
even with Baba Yaga, there is a depth of love in her that has an amazing healing power.
Yep.
And she will not let you get away with anything. And you go there willingly because you can feel the love behind it. And I think that's the pieces of the crone goddesses I've run into. That it's like, they'll get in your face, but there's this level of love. And then they laugh.
Yeah.
They have this spontaneous laughter, which you described really well when you said they're unburdened.
Yeah.
Seriously, they don't have to worry about any of it. Their children are grown, they don't have to pamper them in. They are able to be themselves and do the things that they want to do that comes naturally.
And I think that that's such an important thing to model for younger women. I never want my own daughter to let any part of her amazing spirit go to sleep to be reawakened later. And we get so separated by time and space in our culture today. It used to be everybody lived in the same house, and while some people might be like, "Oh God, I couldn't," but there was a beauty to that system because everyone was sort of mashed up together, and you so you could see your granny, being herself and not, and throwing off the shackles, whatever. But I mean, that's kind of an idealized, not every, older woman experiences that. And I don't know. I guess for me, I was at a bookstore recently with my own grandmother, and Isabel was there, and we were in the children's book section, and my grandmother said to me, "Jen, it's time. I want you to write children's books. This is what you should do. You have the right frame of mind, write children's books." And I said, "Well, I have." And my tone of voice was very like, "Well, I have, but I just don't know if I'm any good."
Uh-huh.
Well, she picked up a book. She goes, "Oh, really?" And her eyes bore into mine. And she picks up a book and she says, "Read this book. Read it to me right now." And she's like flipping the pages. And it was like, Dick is told not to sit, not to stand. It was very simple. It was like, child told not to do this. Does the child listen? No. And then the next page. So she looks at me and she goes, "Do you still think you're not good enough?" It snaps the book closed. So I was like,
good point.
I was like smack down in the Barnes & Noble children's book section. It was very powerful and unexpected. I had no argument. I had no snappy comeback because she was right, and she made her point very effectively with very few words.
Exactly. Yeah, it came right across, completely across. And I was like you, although I had two grandparents. I had a great grandmother and a grandmother. Mm-hmm. And the great grandmother, I spent more time with her. Mm-hmm. She had her house just down, literally across the fields, which were flowers and vegetable gardens. But at the young age, it seems like you have to walk 3 blocks away. But I always called her a witch because she didn't have this finger. She didn't have her index finger on her left hand. It had been chopped off, so all she had was the knuckle. And then, of course, her hands were all gnarled up. And she had this beautiful white hair that was down past her waist that she had to wind up every day. But I would go down and play with her because then I was alone and I had just her. And she would, come in and say, "Okay, here's the ground rules. You got to pick up all your toys after you're done." And I'd say, "Well, I'm just playing marbles." And she'd say, "Well, you got to pick up every one of those marbles or Grandma will fall." And a couple of them fell underneath the buffet. And, Grandma's not going to get underneath that buffet, I thought. And so I don't have to pick them up because it was time to go. She came out from where she was and she said, "You're missing a couple of your marbles." I was like, oh my God, she really is a witch. But again, it's like, how does she know that? She gives you a hug and a kiss and you go and And after that I made sure I picked every single thing up and it stayed with me for the rest of my life. I didn't leave any details out. Mm-hmm. But it was like, you forgot a couple of your marbles. Of course, my brothers had fun with that later on.
I love
not
that.
having all my marbles, but whatever.
That's fantastic.
So
and there's it's so important to tell these types of stories and love them and bring them in because it's so easy to it happens all the time that the elder people get discarded. It's sort of like they become invisible or marginalized or, there's it's senior day at the grocery store again, and it's sort of, there's an impatience, and it's interesting in mythology, there's a goddess, Hel, Hel, in Norse mythology, and she's half beautiful woman and half crone with her fresh flesh rotting off.
Really?
And she's one of Loki's children, his daughter. And her appearance was so off-putting, the story goes. And also she was fated to play a role in Ragnarok, the end of the world cycle. So Odin sent her to the underworld to be queen of the dead, so she became an underworld goddess.
Okay.
And she received the souls of anyone who died not in battle, so natural causes. So the stories went on, she actually was very beloved of women, especially laboring women, because she was the one they were going to meet if they didn't survive childbirth.
Oh.
And Hell's realm was just another realm. It was the land of the dead. It wasn't an evil place.
Yeah.
And to me, when you think about her story, you're also sort of reclaiming or honoring that she's the perfect, melding of the two, of the young and the old. And so you're sort of accepting and reclaiming that part of you also, that which you might want to reject and then you don't, so I like that. And she sorted people based on their occupation in life. So the underworld mirrored the above. So there were villages, there was a whole, you did the same thing in the afterlife as you did when you were alive.
Okay.
And your ancestors sent the living people in your family would send the shaman to hell to see how you were doing and get messages and whatever. So it was a very, it was a very cool, the sense of hell being this evil place you went. This is kind of a rambling aside, but
Yeah, well, it's not, and it's interesting that he put a woman down there that was beautiful and decaying to be the overseer of it. There's the tale too of the young man and the woman who's old and she turns beautiful and back and forth. Again, the choice of, do you want the beauty that doesn't last?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I really think, fortunately, I was never around that idea that a woman wasn't gorgeous when she aged. My father was very often said how beautiful my mother became as she grew older. So I was never put off by the fact that people got old, and a woman got old necessarily. But it became a premise in our society that a woman is not okay. And so then we became, the plastic surgery. And it literally, I would look at some of these women and they would disappear behind this plastic surgery. No longer recognizable, and yet still feeling that they adhered to the beauty standards. And missing that whole time of their life when there is a very different beauty that comes forth from a woman as she ages once she hits that crone stage.
Absolutely.
And, fortunately, there was enough people around that whether they really knew the ancient tales, somehow, some way that knowledge stayed and the women in Africa, as they're older, they take a huge different place within the society once they become they call it the matriarch, and they're very honored. Their whole culture. Same way with the women in the First Nations. The older women take on a huge different role.
Yeah, I love hearing about the 13 grandmothers and their sharings that they do.
Yes, they're doing an incredible gathering together and really helping to bridge that gap between the generations. and
Mhm.
instilling the old ancient knowledge.
And bridging the gap, I think, is like the biggest, the best piece about it is that, for many in there probably, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, but there was, when Christianity spread, the honoring of women and the older women in society, their power got taken away, and they were vilified, and all of that. And so when we recognize honoring today, like in the 13 grandmothers and in these other cultures, we're reconnecting to the past, and it makes a bridge to the future as well, and it's incredibly healing. And there's no reason to deny then any part of yourself. You can happily go forth. And I was in the grocery store recently, and I was trying to get to the toothpaste aisle, I think, and my local Stop and Shop had rearranged the cosmetic aisle. It was like towering these fluorescent lights, and Isabel and I were walking through, and I was like, tower, and on either side was just all this stuff. It was very surreal because I've never really been much of a cosmetic wearer. It was something I would do for special occasions, really. And now, even then, I'm very minimalistic. And I know for many, it's a positive thing, and that's totally fine, as long as you're in control of it and it's not controlling you.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah.
As long as you're not going into debt to buy your, mascara and whatnot. I think as long as it's, like I said, you're in control of it and not in control of you. Why are you doing it? So
yeah, exactly.
My take on it. And I had said to Isabel one day offhandedly, "Oh, Mommy, I'm so old today." She goes, "No, you're not old, Mama. You're new." I thought, "Oh,
that's cool. Keep saying that."
I like that, because we all have those, times when you just feel like, oh my God, I have no energy. I can't put one foot in front of the other,
Yes.
And she came out with that. You're not old. You're new.
Exactly.
New.
That's perfect. It's perfect. I can say, though, that there are times when I am incredibly grateful that I am in my crone, because there are times when I can honestly feel patterns, aspects of younger times, the maiden, the mother. I feel those things slipping away. And it really is a relief, because you're able to see the world in a very wider spectrum than you could when you were in those other stages, because your focus is on those stages, on your children, or on your growing up stage, becoming and understanding what a girl is. But when, as a crone, I can actually feel them slipping off, and then seeing this perspective in a very much broader way. And it paints the world much, it really actually paints the world in a much more peaceful environment.
Yeah, and do you feel that you sort of understand, you have a better understanding, like, of what death is,
Much
what
more.
snow is, and because for me that's still something that I'm like, a little wary of, because I'm afraid to lose people that I love. I don't want to lose. I want everyone to stay put.
Well, they do. They just stay put on this other side where you don't really see them very well. Yeah, and in all honesty, you reach a certain stage, and I think everyone who, all of a sudden, everybody and I'm still I'm really young, early on the crone stage, but there are people that are my age that are going, and there were always a few, but they were like accidents or something. But these are, and older cousins and all of these things that you're just like, wow. And you do, all of a sudden, you kind of stand there and think, wow, I remember when my parents went through this. When, they'd get these high school announcements and so, or, their college or whatever, or neighbor. So it brings the fact that you're on the other side of the hill to you. It does.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to die. And so it just really feels like that's when you're all finished here, you just kind of open the door and go into the next one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really how it feels. And so it's like, okay, I mean, do I want to get hit by a Mack truck? No. But I mean, that part, I know I don't want to hurt, but I'm not afraid of the death. I'm not afraid of death.
Yeah.
And it's not that I feel like my life is over.
Right.
I mean, when I turned 60, I'll tell this funny tale on me. When I was a little girl, everybody, they always ask you, so, and I'm talking, I was little, 6 or 7, 8. I didn't know better. So everybody said, so how long are you going to live? And I said, I'm going to live to be 120. So I went through most of my life thinking, 120, shit, I got a long time. I hit 60 and I went, oh, holy shit, I don't know if I want to do another 60 years. I want to talk to that little girl. We need to come in here and have a conversation. So, but 60 years is nothing. When I was 40, it seemed a long ways away. When I was 50, it seemed a really long ways away. Mm-hmm. But when you get here, it's like, wow, it really didn't take very long.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being engaged in your life makes it seem that it didn't take very long, Mm-hmm. But yeah. And I just, I know as a crone and other ones that we've talked about, there's just a sense of freedom. Wendy and I talked. There's just, it doesn't mean that you don't still struggle with things. It doesn't mean that there aren't still human things that go on. Mm-hmm. But it really doesn't. You can honestly say, that really doesn't matter. Whatever. Yeah. You can say because you're not vested in it anymore. And you find that your identity, I think that's the biggest thing. The identity piece really comes full circle. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, wow. Oh, so this is who I am. So it's cool. Yeah. But it helps having the goddesses.
Yeah.
It really helps having them. And someone who never really studied them until really recently. I mean, the one I ever knew was Hansel and Gretel, the witch there.
Yeah.
And she really wasn't that bad of a woman. She was just lonely.
Well, she was another one. She ate, she
ate the kids, and she didn't really eat the kids. Again, I've always thought of her as a form of Baba Yaga.
Yeah.
She's just a takeoff for Baba Yaga. So, but to really get to know them in mythology is a huge difference. And I really think as a woman, it's some place in which to draw some understanding.
Mm-hmm.
When you go into the stages, because it is confusing when you go into the crone stage.
And I think the beauty of mythology, and we, I'm sure you've heard of this before, is that it's a guidebook. It's a maps for you figure out what's next by going to the mythology. And to me, there's just so many voices out there, so many faces and stories and lore that it's incredibly comforting, and inspiring and enlivening. And, I hope that, as the story ripples out and evolves, that we really revere our true identity and are able to sort of, embrace every stage.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And the stage that's there before you. I mean, my biggest vision is that the crones that are here reach back to the mothers and the matrons. And that those two aspects generations, women also reach forward. But
Mhm.
it's that it's creating that community, that sense of unity as a woman, and saying it's okay. Here's how you get here. Here's how you make it so that it's not so difficult. Because I really think the crone stage going into it still is a very difficult stage for women to accept, comprehend, because it's been shut in the closet,
Yeah.
you know. And the
Yeah,
more,
we have so many like in our culture. It's just when you experience the things that go on in your body, it sort of is like, oh, she's crazy, and it becomes a big joke, and totally fine to have a sense of humor about it, totally fine, but just it's derided,
yes,
it's insults hid disguised as humor.
yes, it is. And as a woman, you feel like you're going insane. You do feel like you're going crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And it's almost like when your body chemistry is in revolt, you then feel you want to be justified in your insanity. You
Yes.
want to say, look, I'm crazy today because such and such happened. And then you realize the next day it's because of your brain chemistry and your hormonal chemistry. And it's like, that's not fair. You know, that's a betrayal to a certain extent. You sort of feel like your body's betraying you. So I think that having women that you can go to, whether it's an older woman actually sitting next to you or goddess lore or whatever, to be able to allow women's mysteries to be celebrated and honored and
Yes, have an initiation of going into that phase, because it really is it's not just, I mean, the thing about the women is you go through puberty, so it's a physical change. When you
yeah.
go into the mother stage, you give birth,
Mm-hmm.
so your body changes again. Then when you go into the crone stage, your body changes again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at the crone stage that we've cut all the information off.
Yeah.
So you walk out into this void and you see all these other women just flailing around wondering what in the world to do. And your other recourse is to deny the fact you're going through it by taking hormone therapy.
Right. Right.
And so having that disconnect connected again will really free up women in a very strong way.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there are many generations that do not look forward to their crone years, and I understand why they wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you were saying, it feels as though your body is betraying you, and
Mm-hmm.
yet it's not.
Right.
It's just changing into the form in which it has to. It's preparing for its journey to the other world.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer, you don't need to bear children because there's people behind you. But once you don't have to bear children and worry about getting pregnant, there's such a sense of freedom. You don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
It's very
much.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So in the natural stages, I think it was really easier when they didn't have so many pills and other things.
Yeah, yeah, and I sort of hope that in for some idealized future, I don't know, in which there's more health overall, physical health overall.
Yeah,
That it kind of brings up a whole other subject about preventative medicine and
how can the
health
crone figure in
food.
preventative medicine? That's a good topic.
Well, my grandmother asked me to look up a yoga instructor who's located in California. Her name is Peggy Cappy,
Mm-hmm.
because she'd seen an infomercial or something about how there was this woman created a yoga series to help teach older people how to take a fall. So if they know they're going down, if there's no avoiding, they're tripping down the stairs and it's going to happen. How can they fall in order to prevent injury?
Wow.
So she was really excited about that. So I went on the website to look it up for her, and there is this whole beautiful, she's not new. It's been around a while. She's got all kinds of books and DVDs and all sorts of things, and it's all designed for older people who to go more gentle and yet build strength,
Yeah.
balance, and core. So she's not saying, oh, you don't have it anymore. It's here. Let's create core strength and a sense of balance for you. So I thought that was very, very cool that there's resources out there. There's ways to get around people and tell stories and meet over cups of coffee and tea and just,
Exactly. There's lots out there. For everyone, if you will email me that, I'll add that to the last
sure.
slide at the end since you've mentioned it, so that we can do that. And so before we close, Jenn, I would love to stay here and talk to you, but I know you have Isabel and your husband to tend to. So is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything else to wrap us up here? I really appreciate this.
I would say that I've been reading stories about the goddess for a really long time, and I love mythology and all of that. And if anyone is looking for a place to start themselves and wants to learn more, I highly recommend anything written by Clarissa Pinkola Estes.
Yes.
Many of people who are viewing this, I'm sure, have heard of her, but she has a beautiful series, I think, through, it's one of those...
Isn't it Sounds True?
It Sounds True. Yes, she has an audio series about the wisdom of the crones and the elder archetype that I think people would really love. And I believe in Women Who Run with the Wolves. There's the story of the hag and Vasilisa, and the ways to read all the female archetypes in a positive, empowering light instead of the negative. And there's a wonderful book by Patricia Monahan that's an encyclopedia of goddesses.
Oh, wow.
From A to Z around the world. And you can just open it,
and spend hours with it.
So there's so much out there, especially now with the internet. Mm-hmm. And I also like going on Pinterest and just creating vision boards, So anyway, I hope that the goddesses feel honored, and I know that there's a certain joy in the stories being told and shared. So
yeah, I think so too. I think they're pleased with us tonight. So, Jenn, thank you very, very much. I've had a great time. And as always, I could talk to you forever and ever and ever, but we must go. So thank you again. Much love to you, and we will be talking soon.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.